Cano, and
Okay.
they're from the south of Madrid. They're the working class team. They stand up for all the true values, anti-capitalism, anti-fascism, anti-corporatism, all those things. So that's my team.
Well, I hope you still score more goals than the other team. That's all counts.
No, we actually another value about Rayo Vallecano is not really caring what the score is. And I tell you
You're
that
crap at football, is that what
seriously,
you're
it's
saying?
like nobody actually cares whether they're winning or not because it's not about that. Now that's actually quite a lot. That's a relief for a football fan, you know.
Okay, that's
Uh,
interesting.
it is. It is. Yeah, I was actually introduced to Rayo by Celtic supporters here in Madrid. So Celtic supporters
Oh,
club.
well, there you go.
So I'm just setting up
There you
this
go. Well, that's
setting
good. As
up the
long as you
screen
enjoy
just
it, man.
now. Okay. Right, I'm just setting the screen so that sort of it's capturing the image that I see, the Skype, with me in the corner, and you're the main subject in the middle. So
Okay.
we'll just
Am I
get
all right for you visually? I don't know.
sound and vision's great, Tony. Sound and vision's great. Okay. So welcome everyone. Welcome to Independence Live once again. Tonight I'm going to be speaking to a documentary maker, Tony Rooke. Tony, how are you?
I'm fine, David. How are you?
Very well, working hard, but not quite as hard as yourself. You have just premiered your new documentary film in London cinemas. Just briefly, how is that going?
It's been very well received. We showed it at a small cinema in Brixton a couple of weeks ago, and then we were very kindly invited up north to the University of Central Lancashire to show it to some film students who knew very little about 9/11, David. And we had a show of hands at the beginning of the film who believed the official narrative of 9/11, and quite a few hands went up. And at the end of the film, no hands went up. So I was quite pleased with that. That was good. The first showing was
Yeah.
purely to the converted, if you like, to the brethren. The second one was not, and it seemed quite effective. So that's good. But the film is specifically aimed at police officers and
Mhm.
firefighters. So that's the real target audience on this documentary.
Okay, so for people who are not familiar, Tony's with us tonight because Tony's challenged the BBC and refused to pay for the BBC licence fee. And so back in, just correct me if I'm wrong, 25th of February 2013 at Horsham
Hmm.
Magistrates Court, uh, Tony presented evidence to a judge that the BBC were complicit in the cover-up of the true events of 9/11 on the day, which in a roundabout way pretty much proved the case that 9/11 is not as we were told it was through our mainstream media. So this was quite an important case. It's not discussed well enough, I don't think, and one of the reasons, or the main reason that I brought you on is that we at Independence Live are a new media who are trying to challenge the orthodoxy of mainstream media, and just get free discussion going and allow people to have different alternative opinions and talk and take questions from viewers, and at no point do we ever try and dictate. But there is an assumption by many people, most people in fact, that over the last 10 or is it 14 years, and 14 years now since that happened, that all of these issues have been discussed and they've been dealt with. And that's not true. That's not true at all. But the illusion is that there are programs that have been on television, particularly the Conspiracy Files program, which was produced by the BBC, have given the impression that all these matters have been looked at and that rational conclusions have been drawn. And that simply wasn't the case, and you took that argument to court. So, Tony, briefly a synopsis. What happens? You went to court, you refused to pay the license fee.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said. The perception is amongst a lot of people, David, that it has been discussed, it's dried and dusted, but that is simply not true. And I was never seeking to go to court with the BBC. I told them in 2005, when I'd become aware of the collapse of Building 7, the fact that the BBC had broadcast the fact, according to them, the fact that Building 7 had gone down twice, about half an hour and 20 odd minutes before it actually occurred. And I come from a fairly well police background. My father was a forensic detective. When somebody tells you something has happened before it's occurred, that raises an eyebrow, to say the very least. And one day the capita, who the collecting agency for the BBC, who collect the license fee in England, I don't know how many of your viewers are aware of the fact that you have to pay 140 odd pounds a year in England just to watch the television, which directly funds the BBC and nobody else. I decided until they could tell me that information, the original source for where they got the information that Building 7 had come down, I wouldn't pay them. And I'd always told them this. This was not a secret by me. And then in around about 2012, they came round to my house and said, you know, where's your license? You haven't paid. And I said, well, no, I haven't. And this is why. And they said, well, you know, we may have to take you to court over this. And it was a very charming young man. He was, you know, it's the usual old story. I'm just doing my job. I said, well, okay, I'm just doing my civic duty. And we ended up in court. To cut a long story short, we showed the evidence to a district judge, all surrounding the collapse of Building 7, not just the fact the BBC had broadcast it before it had gone down, but at the actual collapse and the forensic evidence surrounding the collapse, the physics surrounding the collapse, which completely contradicts Isaac Newton's laws of motion, etc., etc. We had some very good witnesses who came along. And in a nutshell, David, the judge turned around, and what he should have done is fined me £1,000 because I hadn't had a TV license for well over 5 years, at least 5 years, 7 years. He did not fine me, and he refused to tell me to get a new television license. He gave me what they call a conditional discharge, which is effectively a non-sentence. And to this day, I don't have a TV license, and I'm not going to get one. And I don't have a conviction for not having one either. So it was a moral victory over the BBC, I guess. So that's the way I look at it. Lots of people have said otherwise, but I defy anybody to go to court against the BBC and not having a TV license for 7 odd years and get away with that. It took a lot of hard work. I mean, it took about 3 months in preparation, and we flew in people from Denmark and Scotland and all sorts of places. But the judge looked at the evidence and said, okay, fair enough.
I mean, just give us a bit of insight into how you actually put this case together, because I mean, I understand like Niles Harrott, who's a leading chemistry professor, who's put his name to the whole nanothermite in the dust, etc. So I'm not as up on the technical details, but I mean, how did you put that case together? I mean, you brought experts in from all over. I mean, you couldn't have had a more solid case, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, that's the wonders of the internet, David. You know, well, first of all, your initial reaction is to panic. You think, well, hang on a minute, how am I going to take this case to court? Because that's why I wanted to argue that the BBC were in breach of Section 15, Article 3 of the Terrorism Act in the UK, which very clearly prescribes if you have reasonable cause to suspect you are paying money to anybody who may be furthering the purposes of terrorism, then you don't pay. That's a very serious offence. You know, if you gave money to the Irish Republican Army, if you gave money to Al Qaeda, if you gave money to ISIL, then you know you're going to be in huge trouble. So my argument was exactly the same, but it was against the BBC because the broadcasted material that they've given over the events of 9/11 really does amount to a cover-up, which is furthering the purposes of the true perpetrators, who I believe are, factions within the American government. And we presented evidence, of course, that the American government have done this before. We can get onto that a little bit later. So it took about 3 months of networking with friends in the truth movement saying, would you come along and act as an expert witness? Would you give a deposition that we can put forward to the judge? Architects and engineers were involved. At that stage, I think there were around 2,000 architects and engineers who were campaigning for a new investigation into the collapse of Building 7. But we really did centre on Building 7 and nothing but, because of the free fall. And, you know, a building cannot go into free fall acceleration unless all of the structure, or certainly at some point in the building, all of the structure has been severed at the same time, and it fell in symmetrical collapse from 47 stories to the ground in less than 7 seconds. So that's, in a nutshell, and it's very crudely put, what we presented to the judge. And I think, like any sensible human being who looks at it, turned around and said, well, fair point, but I want to keep my job. I don't want to, all that kind of stuff. But and so he kind of let me off.
So it was a strict liability case. You've either got a license or you don't have a license. There's no grey area.
Yeah, that is the thing that you will always come up against in law, that the TV license is strict liability, which effectively is the establishment turning around and saying you have no defence. You have no defence. You have to pay it regardless. Now, we happened to go to court round about the same time as the Jimmy Savile case broke, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners will realise that Jimmy Savile was basically the kingpin of this massive paedophile ring that the BBC had been covering up for years. I used to work at the BBC back in the early 80s during the Falklands War. I'd heard rumours about Jimmy Savile. I was in a very lowly position. I wasn't privy to anything particularly serious, but there were rumours that this kind of thing was going on. And 2013, 20 years later, it comes out. And not only that, it comes out that the BBC, rather than produce a Newsnight programme exposing this shocking behaviour, they'd rather put out a tribute to the man who did Jibble Fix It. So the argument that you can't have a serious cover-up within a respected institution is complete crap. You can, and it's been proven. And so we happened to go to court around about the same time, which I think was a contributory factor in our success, as I would call it.
Okay. So at the moment you've been premiering your new documentary, which is called Incontrovertible. Because why did you choose that title?
Well, because the free fall of Building 7 is incontrovertible. There is no. It's a bit of a mouthful of a word. It's not something we use in everyday language. I'd be the first one to agree, but it really does define the evidence perfectly. Incontrovertible meaning that there is no argument around it. It is incontestable. You can't debate it. It's a fact. It's like the grass is green, or that 2 follows 1. And the freefall collapse of Building 7 is incontrovertible evidence that it had to be brought down by something other than fire. I mean, fire does not burn symmetrically. Fire burns in very irregular patterns. It travels to one area of a source, burns that out, moves to the next one. And I've got lots of firemen in the movie who are saying the same thing. So incontrovertible, uncomfortable as it may be, is the title that we arrived at, or I arrived at. And I stick by it, and I think any police officer or fireman watching it would agree. In fact, any rational human being who watches the collapse of Building 7 would agree. And so the film is really directed solely, not at the 9/11 truth movement per se. It's directed solely at police officers, soldiers, the military, the people who are actually fighting this so-called war on terror. I mean, much as you and I would like to arrest Tony Blair and George Bush, we can't do that. We can march on the streets of London in our millions against the Iraq war. We can, protest, lobby our MPs. We can do all that sort of thing. But nothing's going to happen unless we convert or change the mind of this, the thin blue line of police officers, the thin green line of soldiers, and all the emergency workers as well, who actually protect this establishment, who are lying to us, and we can prove that they're lying to us. And so the film is aimed at them.
Okay.
And hopefully people will grab hold of the film and circulate it to those people, because without converting the minds of those people, David, I think we're screwed.
Well, okay. So how is it being received? What is your audience reaction? What are people coming up and talking to you about after the screenings?
So far, very good. I mean, we've only screened it a couple of times in public, but thus far, I mean, the 9/11 truthers, great. I mean, but the University of Lancashire showing that we had, and I was amazed that we managed to get it shown there, because it was just a kind of general film festival. It wasn't a 9/11 film festival like they have in San Francisco or anything. They were quite shocked. They were hopefully quite moved by it, because hopefully there is some moving stuff in there. It does cover the wars that have ensued because of 9/11 and on all the 22 suicides a day are happening in America from Army personnel. There are more people dying of suicide than dying in combat now in the UK within Army personnel. It has been well received. The ones who have never seen this information before, I think, are quite shocked, and I think that's the initial reaction you get from them. And I think I'd love to speak to them a week after and see how they're sort of dealing with it, because I think it takes, I call it the Father Christmas syndrome. You remember when you're a kid and you believe in Father Christmas, and then somebody tells you when you're maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8, that he doesn't actually exist. And it takes a while for the penny to drop. It's an uncomfortable process. And this is the same thing we see with students. It's the same thing we see with grown-ups and police officers. And I've seen this. I've shown it to police officers. It's uncomfortable for them because they realise that the people they've been working for are not as advertised. It's as simple as that. They think they've been doing a great job. And don't get me wrong, they do a great job. I want the police force, I want the army, I want the firefighters, of course. But there is a point in their duty which they really need to draw a line at, and that is basically protecting terrorists. For want of a better word. It's not for want of a better word, it is the word. Okay. You can look at Operation Northwoods, you can look at the Gulf of Tonkin and all these incidents in the past, which I'm sure your viewers will know about. These people do promote terrorism.
Yeah. Now, if you go onto YouTube, if anybody goes onto YouTube, you'll find presentations about 9/11, about titles such as, let me think, Loose Change is a very good in-depth investigation. There are various versions of it. The latest one is probably the best one to start with if you want to look at it. Follows the money trail, looks at the vested interests. That's one of the first things you should do when you're investigating a crime, of course. Sorry, my mind's kind of going, but there are architects and engineers. There's one called Explosive Evidence. Explosive Evidence looks at the scientific evidence for the use of a material called nanothermite, which is found throughout all of the dust in New York City that came down that day. I mean, there were clouds and there were tons of concrete that came out of those buildings and covered the city, and it's full of this stuff called nanothermite. It can only be developed in a high-tech lab, and it is an incendiary. It's an explosive incendiary that can be used to bring down buildings. And then there's Decade of Deception, which is something that came out this year. Again, I think architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth brought out Decade of Deception. That looks at the 2010 Toronto hearings. So there was actually a series of hearings which were held in Canada, not in the United States, where experts gave evidence. And this is a 2-hour-long documentary of the evidence being given. It's a fantastic documentary. If you really, it's quite comprehensive. It covers most of the areas. And there's a really good one called 9/11 in the Academic Community. And I think this one, I mean, it's quite tough going, it's another couple of hours long or whatever, but this is the reason why there has not been the interrogation of this crime for a full decade after it happened. It's only really sort of after a decade or so after it happened that people within a movement called the Truth Movement, if you want to call it that, have started to really get organised. And architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth had to come together as experts in their field to defend their discipline. Pilots for 9/11 Truth, there's the fire brigade for Truth and Unity, and Firefighters for Truth and Unity, I think is the title for them, and there are various others. And so it's really the whole movement's had to come right back and come and consolidate into professional camps who work together. But your documentary, of course, I mean, you cover a lot of the same ground. You're making the case, but I mean, what's new? What do you contribute to the array of videos which are out there, the documentaries which people can watch, which, what's your new angle on this?
I think the difference with Incontrovertible, David, is that there's a new dynamic here. It's all very well me talking about 9/11, or you talking about 9/11, or even Richard Gage talking about 9/11, who's the head of Architects and Engineers, or Niels Harrit, and all these famous faces, David Ray Griffin, etc., who pop up regularly talking about 9/11 Truth, and they're all very, very valid voices. They're all very intelligent people. But these are police officers, these are firefighters, these are soldiers, these are the very people who have been protecting the system of corruption for an awfully long time. I mean, I haven't bothered to go through the whole film and add up all the years of experience we have, but it's well over 200 years of experience. My father is an ex-forensic detective. He's seen the film and lots of stuff before it, of course. I didn't have him in the film, actually, because that would be nepotism. But, you know, they look at it and think, well, hang on a minute, and say, this is completely wrong. This does not make sense. This goes against every single principle of investigating a crime, every step along the way that you would do to investigate a crime. The first guy we interview in the film is a guy called John Meadows, and John's a lovely man. 32 years with the California Police Department, and he's on record as turning around and quite rightly saying, you know, all the evidence of 9/11 was immediately removed. This was a crime scene. It was taken away. And any policeman watching that will realize, well, that's wrong to begin with. You do not remove a crime scene, even as large as 9/11. You know, forget all the buildings that fell down. I don't mean that in a trivial way. Forget all the buildings that fell down. Forget all the dust. Forget all the debris. You keep it there because you want to study how the structure is going to go down. Now, even in the 9/11 Commission report, the mechanism of failure in the Twin Towers, which we don't touch on in the film at all, we don't touch on it at all. We only concentrate on Building 7. That is completely ignored in the 9/11 Commission report. Of course, Building 7 itself is completely ignored. You know, forget the collapse mechanism, it's just completely ignored as a building. And John quite rightly says, and this is a cop of 32 years experience, he said, if I submitted a report where there were 3 cars in a collision, and I only put 2 cars in that collision report, my sergeant, and I'm quoting, would jump down my throat. And so it's very important that you have the vernacular of police officers, you have the character of police officers talking about this on video, because then other police officers can see it, other firefighters can see it, etc., etc. I think, well, hang on a minute. This isn't Dylan Avery. This isn't Alex Jones. These are cops. These are firefighters. And so the dynamic is different on this film, I would hope. And that's the idea of the film. It's only made for them. I couldn't, pardon my French, give a shit about the 9/11 Truth Movement, only in as much as I want them to take the film and give it to those people. Because without those people, as I said earlier, we're screwed. We need them to understand what's going on here and in the language that they can understand. Yeah. So yeah, that would be the different dynamic of this film compared to the others, I would argue.
Okay, that's interesting. I've actually seen the film myself, so thanks for letting me see it in advance. 2 hours, so it's it covers the case quite completely. How do you respond to people with negative feedback on this? I mean, some of the things that you'll hear are, like, it's in the past, just leave it.
Well, I can't respond to anything so cretinous as that. I mean, so was World War II. If people don't think the Holocaust was important, then they need to seek psychiatric help. If people think 9/11 wasn't important and all the wars that have sprung out of it, then they need psychiatric help. Not to mention the fact that, and this is mentioned in the film, that as a British person, my tax bill has gone up to £2,000 just to fund the wars. I've personally paid £2,000 to fund wars I don't want to fund. I could do a lot of good things with £2,000, David. Donate it to charity or buy a good malt whiskey. It's ridiculous. People that turn around and say that just not really worth talking to, in my opinion.
Interestingly, Noam Chomsky holds this opinion that it wouldn't have been an inside job because it would be too complicated, but secondly, there's no point because you're never going to catch them. I'm one of those people that believes that Noam Chomsky is something of a bit of a gatekeeper, is a pseudo-intellectual fool. You have to bear in mind, if you're going to approach this, and this is what the film is about, as a police officer or someone with that kind of mentality, then you have to look at what are the American government capable of. And we certainly know, because it's well documented, even the BBC have made material about this, that in 1962, General Lyman Lemnitzer decided he wanted to bomb parts of Washington, D.C., bomb parts of Florida,
hijack aircraft, blow up ships, and then blame it all on Cuba, and then go to war with Cuba using a compliant American media to disseminate that information to the American people. So how Chomsky can turn around and say this is ridiculous, it couldn't be done, it was planned before. And it's only in, I think, 1997 when George Washington University got hold of this information via a Freedom of Information Act request into John Kennedy's library, that we found out this was the case. So for Chomsky to turn around and say this doesn't happen is just facile, to say the least. But then again, the man is facile.
Okay.
So that would be my answer to that one.
Fair enough. Now, media, of course, is something that we are, as Independence Live, we're always trying to, question, what is the media, mainstream media, and what's our role within the whole spectrum of information flow. Just how confident can we be in the integrity of mainstream media? Some people will say it's a mixture of different things. It's not one monolith. What do you say to that?
Well, I would urge anyone well, certainly in the United Kingdom, I can't speak for Spain or anywhere else, but certainly America, because I lived in America for quite a while. But just turn on your TV around about 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the evening in England. You will turn on the news and there will be the same story on every single channel. Now, ITV in England is meant to be independent of BBC. It's meant to be independent of Channel 4. It's meant to be independent of Channel 5. But basically, it's a script almost verbatim every single night of the main stories of the news. And we can actually track this back. I mean, we left a lot out of the film that I could have put in, but it would have run into a mini-series. Going back to when the press in America was actually effectively purchased by J.P. Morgan, who were at that time an agent for big arms manufacturers, who bought 25% of the American press so they could have a controlling interest. And now we live in a world where every single news station says exactly the same thing, and all they're saying is effectively to try and scare the crap out of us and kid us into coughing up more money to go to war so they can make lots and lots of money out of, arms and oil and all that kind of guff. I mean, I don't have to teach my grandmother to suck eggs here. We know what it's all about. But as far as the media is concerned, they are obviously lying, and it's not even subtle anymore. They're obviously lying, and it has to stop.
Okay. Just if anybody's out there watching and want to send in questions, do so. Just use the text box at the bottom and we can put some questions to Tony. Now, you've had other interactions with other new media. I think, did you speak to wearechange.org at some point? Is that correct?
No, I mean, We Are Change have been in touch. I think I was due to get in touch with
Luke Radowski.
Yeah, Luke. And unfortunately he was busy and I was busy, but all that sort of stuff. But I'm sure we will. And Luke's a wonderful chap, and I'm full of admiration for him. He's the cheekiest bugger in the world. I absolutely love him. And I've actually used a little clip of Luke's at the end of the film when he's questioning Larry Silverstein.
Yes.
Not only is it hilariously funny, it's also extremely poignant. Catching Silverstein lying yet again.
I think was that not one of his...
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you, when you make a film like this, you speak to a lot of alternative media.
Yeah.
I like to call it honest media.
Yeah, well, that's good.
And that's the way it will proceed from now on in. Yeah. But and the film will turn up at various film festivals. Hopefully, we're showing it at the 9/11 festival next year in Oakland, in California. But really, the audience for this film is not the 9/11 truth movement. It was never meant to be the 9/11 truth movement.
That's good. Yeah.
People want to, download the film, or it'll be out on the internet, available on the internet very shortly, for free. But if they want to buy a DVD or a Blu-ray copy, is what we're urging people to buy, because I'm massively in debt on the film. And so they can show it on a big screen. They can get a projector and show it at their town hall, their place of worship, wherever they want to show it, and invite friends from the police, invite friends from the army, invite friends from the firefighting departments, because to watch the film in a big group is a different dynamic to watching it on your own, as it is with any film, by the way, not just this one. and it's more of an experience. And of course, then you can chat about it afterwards.
That's exactly it.
Long film. It's 2 hours long, and best taken with a large Scotch, David.
Yeah, absolutely. I had some Spanish wine, red wine. Just you've thrown me there. Have you got any plans to have like after film discussions? I mean, one of the people that came on recently with a documentary, Blueberry Soup, they actually took it on tour around Europe, and it was facilitated. There were like discussions that happened after the watching of the documentary, and those were in fact filmed, and you can watch them all on the website and see what people thought. And have you got a plan to actually encourage this kind of facilitate this kind of discussion afterwards?
We've got a situation. We're just trying to get it organised at the moment. There's a very, very strange cinema near where I live, and it's in an old shepherd's hut, and it only accommodates 12 people, which is really bizarre.
Okay.
And we want to show it there, and just get 12 police officers, firefighters, solicitors, whatever, into this little old shepherd's hut. A shepherd's hut is it's almost like a shed on wheels, so it's probably the easiest way to describe it. But it has a cinema built inside it. But 12 is obviously the magic number for a jury. And so the original idea for Incontrovertible was we were going to hire a big hall in London, Conway Hall, which holds about 1,500, and get a jury of police officers to just watch all the evidence that's ever been made about 9/11, loose change and all these, and have this marathon of a day of 9/11 truth movies. But that wouldn't have made a very interesting feature documentary, to be honest. It'd been rather static and not very colourful. And we managed to raise enough money we could travel around a bit and make it a bit more visually interesting and stimulating. But having done the film now, I would like, maybe if I'm going to try it first, obviously, but if people could get 12 coppers, firemen, soldiers, a mixture of, together in one place, and just film them with their video recorders and show them the film, and then get their verdict afterwards. Do you believe, according to British law, is it reasonable cause to believe that to fund the British government, who are the wagging tail of American foreign policy, let's be honest, I mean, we are at the 52nd state, or how many there are, is it reasonable to believe that 9/11 is as advertised? And I honestly, truly, hand on heart, don't believe it is as advertised anymore. And if that's the case, then you don't pay them anymore. And so we'd like to film a little jury of that going on, but that's a few weeks down the line.
Okay, that's good to hear. Baz is, it's a comment from Baz. Basically, the American military-industrial complex has been very proactive since November 22nd, 1963, dictating the course of world politics. I mean, this is part of a bigger plan, and I think that's probably why it's so important. You know, when people say,
I mean, that's why JFK was assassinated, and that's the date that Baz is talking about, because he refused to initiate a false flag attack. I think, anyway. I mean, I don't know what Baz thinks, but when JFK turned round to Lemnitzer and the chiefs of staff and said, "No, we're not going to bomb Washington. We're not going to bomb Florida. We're not going to have all these funerals and let the press disseminate it so everyone's upset." That's, I'm afraid, when he signed his own death warrant.
This was Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods, and actually in Operation Northwoods, a part of the plan, and this is, I mean, these documents exist. They're part of the written form of history. They were going to fly a plane by radio control. That technology existed in 1963, exists today, and actually blow the plane up with a false radio signal saying we are being hijacked by the Cubans.
Well, I mean, we don't know the exact forensic detail on how they're going to do it, but the blowing up of airliners, and the hijacking of airliners certainly was mooted in the document, and how they're going to do it, who knows? Yeah. But it doesn't matter. That's what they said. You know, it was basically, we'll kill our people so we can evade those people. Yeah. And blame those people, and that was, it's terrorism. It's terrorism. Full stop.
And then, but in Operation Northwoods, the plan was to switch the plane, so the real plane would land and a dummy plane.
Yeah, they're going to use drones
off,
and things like that. Thank God they never got to enact it. Well, not then. I'm sure they have since. But yeah, that's and even the BBC have acknowledged the existence of authors, David. I mean, this is well documented. I show it in the film. I've got it off their own website. This is not conspiracy theory, which is always a pejorative term, isn't it? When
it's a conspiracy theory
when the mainstream media talk about it, conspiracy theory. This is proven history.
So for you, this is not a theory. 9/11 is not a theory.
Well, the collapse of Building 7 isn't a theory. The collapse of Building 7 is Newtonian physics, and it could not have been brought down through fire. It's as simple as that. No, it's not theory. It can't be. Well, unless Isaac Newton is wrong, of course. But I'm not willing to buy into that one.
Okay. If anybody's got any more questions, Baz, thanks very much. Baz agrees with the way that you've with your comments there. If anybody's got any more comments, can you put them in just now? Because otherwise, I'm going to just ask Tony just to kind of round things up with a closing remark, should we say? So, Tony, have you prepared?
Well, really, I mean, I just ask people to. I mean, if they want to watch the film for free, it will be available in the next couple of weeks online. www.killingauntiefilms.co.uk. Killing Auntie as in auntie and uncle, which is a reference to the BBC, Auntie Beeb, which is an old saying in England. The BBC are this trustworthy and maternal figure. They're not. Or just buy the DVD or buy the Blu-ray and try and screen it in your community, because as I keep banging on about, I'm like a scratch record now. Without the police, without the army, without the fire service, especially the fire service, because the fire service do have the power to strike, David. The police don't, or they're very unlikely to. Even if you prove to a police officer that, as we do, that the 9/11 was an inside job, they're too scared of losing their money. They're too scared of losing their pension. They're too scared of losing their promotion. That's the sad world we live in. And you can show them disfigured bodies in Iraq of children, etc., etc. People, much as we like to pride ourselves in being wonderful and brave and patriotic, we're not. We're actually a shower of shit when it boils down to it, because we will still go to work knowing that we're working for something very, very wicked. I won't be very popular for saying that, but that's what I truly believe. But if you could persuade maybe a fireman, and I've done this, Matt Campbell, who's in the film, he's a 9/11 victim family member. He lost his brother in World Trade Center 1 on 9/11. He has given the DVD out to fire officers he's seen on the street, firefighters he's seen on the street, and they've taken it away. So hopefully, like Loose Change sort of went kind of viral, hopefully it does within those communities. I'm not so worried about the 9/11 truth movement themselves, but if just one 9/11 truther out of 10 that sees the film gets off their backside and gives it to a fireman or gives it to a soldier, gives it to a police officer, then hopefully that could make a difference. Because without these people, as I've said twice now, we're screwed.
Yeah, just out of interest, the Scottish guy who's the firefighter in the video.
Yeah.
Brian
Maxwell.
Brian Maxwell. I actually met him and spoke to him on Independence Live. I just recognised his face. He was at a Stop the War demo back in, I think it was October. Thereabouts, October, maybe November, October, or no, sorry, it was before that. It was sometime in the summer. It's before the referendum happened. I met him and spoke to him. He just came to the demo and he had 9/11 was an inside job, or investigate 9/11, and that drew me over just to have a word with him about it. So it's all starting to come kind of full circle now.
Brian's a great guy. He's actually still a serving fire officer. He works for the Edinburgh Fire Service, and he's the only guy in the film who's actually still serving. I mean, Fernando Imposamato is still the honorary president of the Italian Supreme Court, but all the other coppers and firefighters, they've retired, and they've retired. I mean, they spoke out at the time, but Brian's still there, and he's a wonderful chap, a really wonderful chap, and and so it was a great joy interviewing him and getting his thoughts on it, and a very brave individual indeed. There's a lot of heroes in the film. That's the nice thing to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult to speak out. That's the thing. And I put my neck out a little bit. Folk who watch the show know that a little bit. But I mean, really, I'm not putting my career on the line. You know, I'm a teacher, and I don't teach like kids in schools. I teach business people in Madrid. You know, it doesn't matter what my opinions on things like this and war are, but I mean, for professionals, people who work within university institutions that have reputations, etc., there's an awful lot of pressure. 9/11 in the academic community is something that people really ought to watch if you want to try and figure out, like, why does Noam Chomsky think this? Personally, I'm not sure he actually thinks this. I think he's avoiding getting into it. I think it's his way of saying, I'm not going there. You know, like, it's too much, because if I get dragged into this, you know, trouble. That's what I personally think. I don't think he genuinely believes what he's saying there. I think he's just trying not to engage. We've actually had email exchanges with Noam Chomsky about this, offline things that we haven't spoken about. I'll tell you what, when do you think this is all going to come out? Do you think that next year, with it being the 15-year anniversary, there's suddenly going to be, you know, a sort of mainstream acceptance that's going to start to begin, like what we've seen with John F. Kennedy, where, like, it's mainstream acceptance that it was a conspiracy? There were three gunmen at least. Or do you think it's going to take like 20 years or something like that?
I bloody hope not, David. I mean, I think it's, yeah. I mean, as you say, I think if you asked 100 people who do you think shot JFK, that at least 50 would say that, you know, the American government were involved.
But just in terms of, like,
we've got a piece on the civil trial of Martin Luther King. Cynthia McKinney was a presidential candidate in 2008. She talks about the civil trial that Coretta King brought against the American government for the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, and a jury found that Martin Luther King was assassinated by the American government.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Most people think that JFK was bumped off by the American government, but they still don't do anything about it.
Yeah,
it's kind of like it's like we've almost like osmosis. We've absorbed the fact that our governments are so corrupt that they will kill people just to keep on going, and you know, we are basically sheep, and we accept this.
Yeah.
And as long as they don't bother us, that's fine. I think most people now, if you ask, and I speak to people at airports, I speak to people in the street, I speak to a lot of people about it. Police officers, obviously, doing the film, they don't trust the official narrative of 9/11, but if their attitude is, what do you want me to do about it? I only want a quiet life.
No.
That's the sad thing. That's the sad thing. I think maybe as we draw more towards even greater interference in the Middle East with Syria and things like that. Well, I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I'm a bit pessimistic, really. I think until the bombs start dropping on London, people won't do anything about it.
Yeah.
I'd like to give you a good news story at the end of this, but I can't.
No,
until we're actually ready to get off our asses and do something about it, nothing much is going to happen.
Yeah, and then there's this thing about being presented with the royal family as if they're to be, not so much in Scotland, but I know the rest of the UK, England anyway, it's like, you know, worshipping them like demigods. And
it's a bloody disease.
And the white elephant in the room is that old bitch had her daughter-in-law murdered, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very, very good film.
Going on skiing holidays with her dad, who was probably behind the whole thing, you know? Keith Allen, Unlawful Killing. You know, this documentary was banned for, like, you know, I don't know, 3 or 4 years or something. You couldn't get a hold of it on the internet or anything. They suppressed it that badly. It's only just coming out, you know, within the last year or so that you can actually watch it and, you know, get a fair
you always know that you've done something right if you're banned in this country, that's for sure. Yeah, it's like Voltaire said, if you want to know who's ruling you, look at who you cannot criticise. And that's basically what we're up against.
Yeah. Okay, on that note, thanks very much to those people who joined us tonight. Thanks very much to Baz for your contribution. Tony, it's been great having you on. Okay, thanks very much for your contribution to the discussion this ongoing discussion about media that we're having here at Independence Live. So, you're welcome to come back on at any time. And okay, so everybody, for me, David, I'm doing my own tech tonight. Independence Live is having a big social in Edinburgh, so on my Todd tonight. So from me and the rest of the team in Edinburgh, okay, peace.
You too, mate. Cheers. Bye.
Okay, Tony, we're off here.